The fluorescent lights of the courtroom hummed, a dull counterpoint to the frantic rhythm of my heart. My hands, clasped tightly in my lap, were slick with sweat. "Miss Parker, are you ready to proceed?" Judge Mallory's voice, crisp and impersonal, cut through the tense silence. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. This sterile, impersonal space was a far cry from the manicured lawns and celebratory atmosphere of my brother Tyler's wedding weekend, the weekend that had spiraled into this very courtroom drama. A seemingly perfect wedding weekend turns into a family drama. "Yes, Your Honor," I finally managed, my voice wavering slightly. Across the aisle, Aunt Vivien sat ramrod straight, her face a mask of composed indifference. Her lawyer, a sleek, expensively dressed woman named Miss Thorne, gave me a tight, predatory smile. It made my stomach churn. This woman, this courtroom, this whole ordeal, it was all because of the secret Aunt Vivien had guarded so fiercely, a secret that had poisoned my family for years. The plaintiff alleges that the defendant, Vivien Holloway, knowingly and maliciously interfered with the plaintiff's rightful inheritance, Judge Mallory summarized, her case sweeping across the courtroom. "Miss Parker, you claim Ms. Holloway concealed a crucial document that would have proven your grandfather's intent to leave a portion of his estate to you. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," I said, my voice gaining strength. I had to do this, not just for myself, but for my mother. For the years of subtle slights and whispered dismissals we had endured at the hands of Aunt Vivien and her perfect family. My grandfather, George Parker, adored me. He always promised I would be taken care of. I met Aunt Vivien's gaze, holding it steady. There was a flicker of something in her eyes, a brief flash of fear. "Objection!" Miss Thorne's voice rang out, sharp as shattered glass. "The plaintiff's claims are based on hearsay and speculation." "Overruled," Judge Mallory said, a tone brooking no argument. "Miss Parker, please continue." I took a deep breath, forcing myself to focus. "My grandfather's will, as it stands, leaves his entire estate to Aunt Vivien. However, we believe he drafted a later amendment specifically mentioning me. This amendment has mysteriously disappeared." "Mysteriously?" Miss Thorne scoffed, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Perhaps your grandfather simply changed his mind." "He wouldn't have," I insisted, the conviction burning in my chest. "He loved me. He promised me." My voice caught, the memory of my grandfather's warm smile, his twinkling eyes, suddenly overwhelming me. I swallowed hard, pushing the emotion down. I couldn't afford to break down now. Not here. "Promises are not legally binding, Miss Parker," Miss Thorne said smoothly. "Do you have any concrete evidence to support your claim? Anything beyond sentimental childhood memories?" Her words stung, but I refused to let them derail me. "I do," I said, my voice firm. "I have witnesses who can testify to my grandfather's intentions, and I have reason to believe Aunt Vivien had both the motive and the opportunity to conceal the amended will." A nervous aunt's strange behavior unveils a shocking truth. Miss Thorne's smile faltered, just a fraction. I saw it, a tiny crack in her carefully constructed facade. It gave me a surge of hope, a much-needed boost of adrenaline. I was finally on the offensive. I had spent months meticulously piecing together the truth, sifting through old photographs, tracking down family friends, and analyzing every interaction I had ever had with Aunt Vivien. And now, finally, I was ready to expose her. "Your Honor," I said, turning to Judge Mallory, "I request permission to present my evidence." The judge nodded, her expression neutral. "Proceed, Miss Parker." This was it. The culmination of months of anguish, frustration, and relentless determination. I had been dismissed, ridiculed, and gaslighted. My own family had turned their backs on me. choosing to believe Aunt Vivien's carefully crafted narrative. That I knew the truth. I had lived it. And I would not be silenced. I would fight for what was rightfully mine. For the justice that had been denied for so long. The whispers that had plagued my family for years were about to become a roar. Whispers and suspicions built during a celebratory weekend. I was ready to unleash it. First, I said, my voice resonating with newfound confidence, I'd like to call Mrs. Eleanor Davis to the stand. Mrs. Davis, my grandfather's longtime housekeeper, had been a silent observer to the dynamics within our family for decades. She had seen the favoritism, the manipulation, the subtle cruelty that Aunt Vivien had inflicted on my mother and me. She knew the truth about my grandfather's intentions, and finally, she was ready to tell it. As Mrs. Davis made her way to the witness stand, I glanced across the aisle at Aunt Vivien. Her carefully composed mask had finally slipped. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of anger and fear. The fear I had glimpsed earlier, now amplified, undeniable. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a flicker of satisfaction. The game, Aunt Vivien, was finally changing, and I was holding all the cards. The courtroom buzzed with hushed whispers. I smoothed down my skirt, the stiff fabric a stark contrast to the rolling emotions within me. A seemingly perfect wedding weekend turns into a family drama. I began, my voice steadier than I felt. And my Aunt Vivien's erratic behavior was just the beginning. The judge's expression remained impassive. I took a deep breath and continued, recounting the events of that fateful weekend, the whispers, the suspicions, and the shocking truth that had finally come to light. The truth that would change everything. My lawyer, Mr. Henderson, squeezed my shoulder reassuringly. Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'd like to take the jury back to a specific incident from Ms. Parker's childhood. Mr. Henderson gestured towards me. One that will illuminate the dynamics at play within this family. The judge nodded curtly. Flashback _1. I closed my eyes. The sterile courtroom fading away, replaced by the warm, buttery scent of Grandma Rose's kitchen. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. It was my 12th birthday, a day I had eagerly anticipated. Grandma Rose, renowned for her baking prowess, had promised me her famous triple-layered chocolate cake. The one with the rich fudge frosting and candied violets. Just for you, my special girl, she'd whispered, a twinkle in her eye. I could practically taste it. Emily, my cousin and Aunt Vivien's daughter, was 2 years older and, in my grandmother's eyes, infinitely more sophisticated. I watched as she flitted around the kitchen, a vision in her new pink dress, a blonde hair cascading down her back. Grandma Rose doted on her, praising her every move, while I sat at the kitchen table, nursing a lukewarm glass of milk and a growing sense of unease. Emily, darling, would you like to help me ice the cake? Grandma Rose asked, her voice dripping with honey. Oh, yes, Grandma, Emily chirped, grabbing the spatula with an air of practiced expertise. I shuffled my feet under the table, hoping to catch my grandmother's attention. Maybe she'd forgotten about my cake. Maybe she'd baked too. Grandma, I piped up, my voice small. Is my cake ready yet? Grandma Rose paused, her hand hovering over a bowl of candied violets. She looked at me, a flicker of something I couldn't quite decipher in her eyes. Oh, Jessica, she said, her tone laced with a strange mix of amusement and condescension. I thought you understood. This cake is for Emily. It's a special day. My stomach lurched. It's my birthday. I stammered, my voice trembling, my eyes welled with tears. The candied violets, shimmering under the sunlight, suddenly looked like cruel, sparkling jewels mocking my disappointment. Emily, oblivious to my distress, continued to meticulously spread the frosting, her tongue darting out to catch a stray smear. It's my confirmation, she announced, as if explaining something to a particularly slow child. A much more important occasion, Aunt Vivien, who had been observing the scene with a smug smile, chimed in. That's right, dear. Confirmation is a significant step in one's spiritual journey. Birthdays, well, they come every year, don't they? Grandma Rose nodded in agreement. Besides, she added, patting my head dismissively, you don't need cake, Jessica. You're getting a little chubby. The words stung like a slap. I looked down at my hands, clenched tightly in my lap. The image of the triple-layer chocolate cake, the one I had been dreaming about for weeks, dissolved into a bitter, sugary haze. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just sat there, silently swallowing the lump in my throat, the injustice of it all burning a hole in my chest. I learned a valuable lesson that day. In my family, love, attention, and even cake were commodities, distributed unevenly and unfairly. And Emily, the golden child, always got the biggest slice. Even on my birthday, even when it wasn't her birthday, even when it was her confirmation. End flashback _1. I opened my eyes, the courtroom snapping back into focus. This, Your Honor, I said, my voice now laced with steel, was just one example of the favoritism Emily enjoyed throughout our childhood. A favoritism that extended far beyond birthdays and cakes. I looked directly at Aunt Vivien, who sat across the aisle, her face carefully blank. The game, Aunt Vivien, is far from over. I remember the biting chill of that November air, the kind that seeps through your coat and settles deep in your bones. It was my 16th birthday, and despite the grey skies, I felt a giddy excitement bubbling inside me. My Aunt Vivien, Dad's older sister, had promised to take me to the city for a shopping spree, a 16th birthday tradition she'd established with both my older brother, Tyler, and my cousin, Emily Parker. Just us girls, she'd declared, winking. A day of pampering and indulgence. You deserve it, Jessica. That morning, I carefully chose my outfit. A new burgundy sweater, dark wash jeans, and my favorite ankle boots. I wanted to look sophisticated, grown up. This wasn't just a shopping trip. It was a rite of passage. Aunt Vivien always made these outings feel incredibly special, filled with whispers of family secrets and shared jokes. This time, I imagined she might even let me in on some of the grown-up gossip. A glimpse into the world I was so eager to enter. Ready for the big city? Dad asked, his voice tinged with amusement as I practically bounced down the stairs. Born ready, I reply, grabbing my coat. Aunt Vivien was already waiting in the driveway, her silver Mercedes gleaming under the overcast sky. The drive into the city was filled with the usual chatter: school, friends, my upcoming sweet 16 party. Aunt Vivien listened patiently, offering her usual mix of gentle teasing and sage advice. But something felt off. A seemingly perfect wedding weekend turns into a family drama. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but a strange tension hung beneath the surface of our conversation, like a discordant note in a familiar melody. We arrived at our usual first stop, La Crème de la Crème, a high-end boutique that felt more like a museum than a clothing store. The delicate fabrics, the hushed voices of the saleswomen, the faint scent of expensive perfume. It was a world away from my small-town life. Aunt Vivien, in her element, began pulling dresses from the racks, holding them up against me with a critical eye. This one, Jessica, she declared, presenting a shimmering emerald green gown. Absolutely stunning. It would be perfect for your party. My heart skipped a beat. The dress was breathtaking, but I knew it was way beyond our budget. Aunt Vivien, it's beautiful, but nonsense, she interrupted, waving her hand dismissively. A special occasion deserves a special dress. Besides, she leaned in conspiratorially, it's a secret between us. I couldn't help but grin. This was the Aunt Vivien I knew and loved, extravagant, generous, always making me feel like a princess. We continued to browse, piling up armfuls of clothes, shoes, and accessories. With each item, my excitement grew. This was more than just a shopping spree. It was a dream come true. Then, Emily Parker and her mother, my Aunt Carol, walked in. A chill went down my spine. Completely different from the November air. Emily, always perfectly posed, gave me a cursory glance, a small, almost imperceptible smirk playing on her lips. "Aunt Vivien," she exclaimed, rushing over to embrace her. "What a surprise! I didn't know you were in town. A little birthday treat for Jessica," Aunt Vivien replied, her voice suddenly losing its warmth. The shift was subtle, but unmistakable. "Oh, right," Emily said, her eyes flicking down to the pile of clothes I was holding. "Happy birthday, Jessica." The words were flat, devoid of any genuine warmth. The conversation shifted to Emily's upcoming debutante ball. My Aunt Carol launched into a detailed description of the elaborate preparations, the designer gown, the exclusive guest list. Aunt Vivien listened intently, her earlier enthusiasm replaced by a strained politeness. The air in the boutique thickened, heavy with unspoken words. I felt the growing unease, a sense of being excluded, pushed to the periphery. The earlier joy of the day began to evaporate, replaced by a gnawing emptiness. As my Aunt Carol continued to gush about Emily's ball, Aunt Vivien turned to me, her face a mask of forced cheerfulness. "Jessica, darling," she said, her voice brittle, "why don't you try on those dresses? We'll see which one suits you best." I nodded, my throat suddenly tight. I retreated to the dressing room, the weight of the emerald green gown suddenly feeling heavy in my hands. As I slipped it on, the shimmering fabric seemed to mock me, a symbol of a promise broken, a dream turned sour. When I emerged from the dressing room, Aunt Vivien and Aunt Carol were deep in conversation, their voices low and urgent. They stopped abruptly as I approached, their faces etched with a mixture of guilt and annoyance. "It's lovely, dear," Aunt Vivien said quickly, barely glancing at me, "but perhaps a bit too much." My face burned with shame. I knew exactly what was happening. Emily wanted the dress, and Aunt Vivien, ever eager to please her favorite niece, was taking it away from me. "Actually," Emily Parker chirped, stepping forward, "I think it would be perfect for my winter formal. Don't you, Mom?" Aunt Carol nodded enthusiastically. "Absolutely perfect, darling," and just like that, the dress was Emily's. The shopping spree ended abruptly. Aunt Vivien drove me home in silence. The earlier warmth and camaraderie vanished. I stared out the window, the grey sky mirroring the emptiness in my heart. A hidden family secret threatens to ruin a brother's wedding. My 16th birthday, a day that had promised so much, ended in a bitter taste of betrayal. My hand trembled slightly as I reached for the microphone. The room, filled with the remnants of my brother Tyler's rehearsal dinner, was abuzz with nervous anticipation. Aunt Vivien, pale and clutching her wine glass like a lifeline, avoided my gaze. "I have something I need to share," I announced, my voice surprisingly steady despite the pounding in my chest. A seemingly perfect wedding weekend turns into a family drama. Julian squeezed my hand reassuringly. The events of the past few days had been a whirlwind. The initial joy and excitement surrounding Tyler's wedding had slowly morphed into suspicion and unease, all thanks to Aunt Vivien's increasingly bizarre behavior. Her hushed phone calls, her furtive glances, the way she'd flinched whenever I came near it all pointed to something being deeply wrong. And I knew, deep down, that it had something to do with me. Natalie, Tyler's fiancée, had tried to reassure me earlier. "You're being paranoid, Jess," she'd said, her hand resting on my arm. "Vivien's just eccentric." We'd shared a laugh then, a moment of lightheartedness that now seemed a lifetime ago. That laugh, I now realized, had been the final straw for Aunt Vivien. It was the moment her carefully constructed facade began to crumble. As you all know, I continued, addressing the room. Our grandfather, Richard Parker, passed away a year ago. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the guests. Grandfather Richard, the man who built the Parker Empire, the man who, in his will, had inexplicably left me, his eldest granddaughter, a paltry sum while bequeathing the bulk of his fortune to Aunt Vivien, a fortune I deserved, a fortune I had worked for. Grandpa Richard and I were close, I said, my voice catching slightly. He always told me I was the one who understood his business, the one who would carry on his legacy. This wasn't an exaggeration. Throughout my childhood and teenage years, I'd spent countless hours by his side, absorbing his wisdom, learning the intricacies of his real estate empire. He'd even promised me a key role in the company once I graduated. A promise he'd broken when he wrote his will just months before his death. I was devastated when I read his will, I admitted, looking directly at Aunt Vivien, who now seemed to be struggling for breath. It didn't make sense. It wasn't like him. I paused, letting the silence hang heavy in the air. So I started investigating. The room was utterly silent. Every eye was on me. I could feel the weight of their gazes, the unspoken question hanging in the air. What had I found? I hired a forensic document examiner, I revealed, my voice gaining strength. And guess what? Grandpa's signature on a revised will. A forgery. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Aunt Vivien's face drained of all color. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. I also discovered something else, I continued, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. A series of large sums of money transferred from Grandpa's accounts to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. An account belonging to I paused for dramatic effect, letting the tension build. Aunt Vivien, whispers erupted around the room. The shock was palpable. Tyler and Natalie stared at Vivien, their faces a mixture of disbelief and hurt. You stole from Grandpa, Tyler stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. Aunt Vivien remained silent, her eyes darting nervously around the room. She looked trapped, cornered. I pulled a small flash drive from my pocket. I have all the evidence here, I said, holding it up for everyone to see. Bank statements, the forensic analysis, everything. I walked towards Tyler and Natalie. I'm not doing this to cause a scene, I said, my voice softer now. I'm doing this for Grandpa, for justice, and to reclaim what is rightfully mine. I handed Tyler the flash drive. He took it hesitantly, his hand shaking. He looked at me, then at Vivien, then back at me again. He didn't say a word, but the look in his eyes spoke volumes. He believed me. The room was in chaos. People were talking over each other, their voices rising in a crescendo of disbelief and anger. Aunt Vivien, finally finding her voice, started to protest, but her words were drowned out by the noise. I watched her, a strange sense of calm washing over me. I had done it. I had exposed her. But this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. The real battle was yet to come. And I was ready. The gavel slammed down, echoing in the silent courtroom. Order. Order in the court. Judge Mallory's voice boomed. But it was hardly necessary. Every eye in the room was glued to me, waiting for the verdict. Waiting for the truth to finally be laid bare. Members of the jury, have you reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor, the foreman, a stern-faced woman with steel-grey hair, declared. She handed the bailiff a folded piece of paper. My heart hammered in my chest. This was it. This was the culmination of everything. My brother Tyler's wedding weekend, which started with such promise, had turned into a family drama of epic proportions, uncovering a hidden family secret that threatened to ruin everything. Julian, my fiancé, squeezed my hand reassuringly. It's almost over, he whispered. The bailiff passed the verdict to Judge Mallory, who unfolded it with a practiced flick of her wrist. The silence in the courtroom was thick, heavy with anticipation. I could practically hear the whispers and suspicions that had followed me for months finally solidifying into tangible form. I held my breath as the judge began to read. In the case of Jessica Parker versus Vivien Blackwood and Tyler Parker, the jury finds in favor of the plaintiff. My Aunt Vivien, seated beside my brother Tyler, gasped. Tyler's face was ashen, his eyes darting between his aunt and me. He still couldn't believe I'd do this. He still couldn't comprehend the depth of their betrayal. On all counts, the judge continued, her voice clear and unwavering. A wave of relief washed over me, so potent I almost swayed. The details of the lawsuit were complex, but it boiled down to this. Aunt Vivien, driven by greed and a long-held resentment, had systematically manipulated my grandfather into changing his will, disinheriting me completely and leaving everything to Tyler. It had been a carefully orchestrated plan, executed over years, built on a foundation of lies and manufactured scenarios. This is outrageous, Aunt Vivien shrieked, rising to her feet. She's lying. It's all lies. Order. Judge Mallory's voice cut through Vivien's outburst. Madam, you will be held in contempt if you continue to disrupt these proceedings. Vivien slumped back into her chair, defeated. Tyler put a hand on her shoulder, his face a mask of disbelief. He'd been complicit in the whole thing, blinded by the promise of wealth and status. He'd chosen to believe her lies over my truth. But the truth, as they say, always comes out, and I had made sure of it. I hadn't simply presented the forged will to the court. I had meticulously gathered evidence, piece by painstaking piece. I had obtained security footage from the bank showing Aunt Vivien coercing my grandfather into signing the altered documents. I had unearthed emails between Vivien and Tyler discussing their plan. Emails they thought they had deleted, but I, with the help of a skilled digital forensic expert, had recovered. And then there was the letter my grandfather had written me just weeks before his death. A letter Aunt Vivien had intercepted and hidden. I had found it tucked away in a dusty box in the attic of his old house, a place Vivien had overlooked in her haste to erase any trace of his true intentions. Jessica, my dearest granddaughter, the letter began, the words penned in his familiar shaky script. I know things haven't been easy for you, but I want you to know how much I love you and how proud I am of the strong, independent woman you've become. I had read that letter aloud in court, my voice trembling with emotion. The jury had hung on to every word, their faces etched with sympathy and understanding. The letter went on to detail his intentions to leave the bulk of his estate to me, his only granddaughter, the one who had always cared for him, the one who had seen through Vivien's manipulative facade. He had even specifically mentioned his suspicions about Vivien's influence, writing, I fear Vivien is not being entirely truthful with me, and I'm worrying about her intentions. He'd instructed me, in the event of any discrepancies in his will, to seek legal counsel immediately. It was the smoking gun I needed. The judge continued, her voice resonating through the courtroom. The court orders the original will, dated July 12, 2022, to be reinstated, effectively nullifying the fraudulent document presented by the defendants. Furthermore, the court finds Ms. Blackwood guilty of elder abuse, fraud, and forgery. Sentencing will be scheduled for next month. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Justice had been served, but it wasn't just about the money. Not really. It was about the betrayal. It was about the years of subtle manipulations, the constant undermining, a feeling of being an outsider in my own family. It was about Aunt Vivien's smug pronouncements about Tyler being the golden child, the heir apparent, the one destined for greatness. It was about the way Tyler, blinded by ambition, had gone along with it all, dismissing my concerns as petty jealousy. A nervous aunt's strange behavior had indeed unveiled a shocking truth, unraveling our seemingly perfect wedding weekend into a tense confrontation, a family drama that played out in the harsh glare of the courtroom. As the courtroom emptied, I walked over to Tyler and Vivien. They were surrounded by reporters, their faces pale and drawn. Tyler avoided my gaze, shame etched onto his features. Vivien, however, glared at me, her eyes filled with venom. "You'll regret this, Jessica," she hissed. "You've destroyed everything." I met her gaze unflinchingly. "No, Vivien," I said, my voice steady and calm. "You destroyed everything. I simply put the pieces back together, in the right order." I turned to leave, Julian's arm around my waist, a sense of closure washing over me. The whispers and suspicions that had plagued me for so long finally dissipated, replaced by the quiet satisfaction of knowing that the truth had prevailed. The seemingly perfect wedding weekend that had imploded into chaos had led me here, to this moment of vindication. And as I walked out of the courtroom, into the bright sunlight, I knew that this was not just the end of a chapter, but the beginning of a new life. One built on truth, justice, and the unwavering strength of my own conviction.